So I'd like to introduce Dietmar Offenhuber. He is a new hire in a joint hire of art and design and the public policy department, right? And I think Dietmar in many ways represents the university's kind of model new member of a faculty because of, and we'll see based on the lecture tonight if you measure up to our high expectations. But we'll report back to you. Dietmar got an architecture degree from the Technical University in Vienna in 2002. And then in 2008 got a master's degree from in media arts and sciences from the Media Lab at MIT. Until very recently, Dietmar was a research fellow at the Sustainable City Lab at MIT. Sensible City Lab. And Dietmar's own research and kind of creative work have fallen into two general categories. One is interactive information design around certain urban infrastructures like waste. But I didn't realize this because I'm on a search committee with Dietmar. Dietmar also collaborates with a acoustical engineer and two composers also on performance installation pieces that have been shown at some spectacular festivals around the world. And when you collaborate on that work, your group is called Stott Music, which is very important sounding and serious. And maybe you'll have some of that work here too tonight. Is that true?
Oh, yes.
A little bit of that? So I think that Dietmar also represents this double lives that a lot of faculty live in the art and design and architecture faculty, which is between practice and research. And I think that there'll be some lessons that, and some discussion we can have about how your work on the, let's say, the serious information design side cross-fertilizes with your more creative work too. I think that might be one of the themes of the Q&A. And then last but not least, Ivan and Dietmar and Suzanne and I are leading a search for a new person in information design. And a lot of that is being discussed around some ideas for a new program in information design that might be a collaboration between art and design, public policy, and maybe even architecture. So those things are in the works, the very early stages, but we're using the search process in a way to, through the discussion of the candidates, are there any candidates here tonight? No. To figure out what that all means in terms of the changing discipline of information design at the intersection of many other disciplines. So I think without further ado, we'll let Dietmar get started. Did I miss anything important?
That's perfect. So yeah, I'm going to talk about my most recent research, but also will include a perspective of earlier work and show, how all those different things that I've been doing connect, hopefully, somehow. And I'm going to talk about mainly my recent work on accountability technologies. How many people, has anyone seen Alphaville, or anyone know the film? Yeah. So it's this, in a way, a very early film on smart cities from the 1960s, and it's a film about this omniscient computer that controls the infrastructure of a city based on principles of reason and efficiency, until this guy, Lemmy Caution, takes everything down. What I found quite funny is that Jean-Luc Godard initially wanted to call this film Tarzan versus IBM. And that's quite interesting, because we know that today IBM is one of these companies that is on the forefront of the smart cities movement. And the idea is generally to improve the management of cities, to attach sensors to all kinds of physical urban infrastructure, roads, sewer systems, electricity grids, and to figure out ways how to make these systems more responsive, more dynamic, and more efficient. So again, the same principles, efficiency and and reason. And those systems are not always supposed to be recognized. We might not notice them. This is a street lamp that is designed by a Michigan company, IntelliStreets. Looks like a street lamp that you would see in Boston, in the Boston Common maybe. But it includes a number of really interesting things, all kinds of surveillance technologies, concealed speaker systems for announcements and alerts, proximity sensors, emergency lights. To make it a little bit less scary, it also includes, these kind of displays for announcing festivals and things like that. And it comes in different styles, from traditional to contemporary. So we see that we have immediately a question of governance. So who controls these things, and what are the city managers are doing with all this data that these devices collect? Staying with this metaphor of Alphaville, there are also, we can say also, that the Tarzans of smart cities, such as Peter Franken from Safecast. He's an engineer who developed a number of Geiger counters for iPhones, and he coordinated a group of volunteers who monitored radiation after the Fukushima disaster in 2011. And I think he's a very good example of what Eric Paulus called the rise of the expert amateur. So people who are concerned that our infrastructure is managed in a responsible way and who want to participate in the governance of these systems. So today I'm going to talk about legibility. The political scientist James Scott, for him was legibility a central problem of governance. So he wrote that in his book, Seeing Like a State, that the legibility of a society provides the capacity for large-scale social engineering. So in order to govern a state, you really have to know where people and where things are in order to make the right decisions. So his concept of legibility is a legibility from above. So it only makes sense from the perspective of a national state or of a city government, because people on the ground, they don't really have their local knowledge, so they don't really benefit from this standardization of. And he mentions a number of interesting examples of legibility. For example, surnames of people and birth registers. All those were means in the 18th century to make a society more legible. But I think Scott misses that we also need legibility from below sometimes. There are situations, especially when we're talking about cases such as Safecast, Peter Franken, people who want to participate in infrastructure governance, and people who want to make sense of a situation a situation that they're exposed to. So the second name that is very closely connected to the word legibility would be Kevin Lynch. He was an urbanist, and in the 1950s he started this project together with artist Georgi Kepes at MIT to map out the perceptual image of the city of Boston in that case. And he conducted interviews, let people create sketch maps of how they remember, how they see the city, how they to what extent they're able to make sense of the urban fabric. And his concept of legibility is a legibility from below. It is not derived from the fabric, from the geometry of the city. It's something that is emergent. So Kevin Lynch had this hypothesis that a good city form is a city that is legible, and I think the same can be extended to infrastructure systems, to public services, and especially to questions of infrastructure governance. And in my work, I'm specifically interested in the role of representations, of visualizations, of images, the role of these artifacts in mediating the relationship between the individual and the system and the service provider. So I will start with a number of different works that were touching on this question of how to make the city legible. One very early influence for me was the work of Masaki Fujihata in the early 1990s. So he was the first artist who used GPS as a medium for creating art. And in this project, he mapped Mount Fuji with a group of students. And at that time, GPS didn't have really a three-dimensional component. It was only a 2D position that you would get from the system. So he had to figure out how to reconstruct the vertical dimension. So his idea was to use the speed at which the participants would walk as an indicator for the steepness of the terrain. So if they would walk very slow, he would assume, the algorithm that he developed would assume that the terrain is very steep. And because of that, we also see this exploded image on the left, because on the peak of Mount Fuji, his group of participants would stop, and the algorithm would just continue increasing the steepness of the terrain. So here we have, for me this was very interesting, because here we have a mode of representation that is not based on the accurate geometry of the landscape of space, but rather derived from behavioral subjective aspects. And this also connects to a second thing that was very influential for me back 10 years ago when I, 15, 20 years ago when I studied architecture, was the work of different human geographers and the concept of relative space. Just this basic idea that you can measure space not only through absolute units, but also based on the number of social contacts, based on cost, based on minutes, based on all kinds of other individual parameters. Of course, I mean, today this sounds very trivial, but back then this really blew my mind, and I started working on different projects that would attempt to capture all those subjective and relative spaces of different cities. So I did a project in 2000 in Los Angeles, in Germany, and in Japan. And I would come up with different algorithms that would capture certain parameters of these relative spaces, either time space, information density, narrative explanations of trajectories through the city, and so on. And one of these examples led to my collaboration with two sound artists and composers from Berlin. This is Besenbahn. This was from 2001. This was still part of the Los Angeles piece, a kind of side project. And here the idea was to, well, basically I'm going to show the 1 minute excerpt and then going to explain. So I was basically measuring all the different time distances in different parts of Los Angeles, and I mounted a camera in the side window of the car, and here every of these 18 frames would include would show the same image, but always with a half a second delay, and based on the movement of the camera, you would again get a connected image. And this was related to Venturi and Scott Brown's idea that the scale of physical space, the scale of the city, is a function of the speed of the motorized observer. So if you have architecture, I'm sure you're all familiar with learning from Las Vegas. So this idea of this inversion to have the behavior of the people as, to some extent, the driver of the landscape. And then, of course, also Ed Ruscha's work from the 60s, every building on Sunset Strip, that would, well, map out a very long connected panorama. So with Sam Auring and Hannes Strobel, we formed the group Stadtmusik, and we explored the role of hearing for our perception of urban space. I'm just going to show one second example of Stadtmusik. This is Mauerpark. Here we have Mauerpark, a park in Berlin that was part of the of the Berlin Wall, and the wall is gone, but it's still a very it's still an open space. It's now an open park that people use, but it has a very funny shape, and no urban planner would design a park like that. So it's entirely this historical artifact. And here the idea was to explore the notion of hearing perspective, that our hearing also has some level of depth perception, that we structure space through our hearing as well as through our vision. And in this video, we try to capture this hearing perspective through a visual algorithm. This is again a very short snippet from a longer video. So the audio here is basically unprocessed. It's recorded with a very special microphone that has a very high depth resolution. It would capture both the footsteps of the people who walk in the foreground, but also the cars that would drive on the street on the other side of the park, and the depth or the distance of these phenomena was translated into the visual space through these through the depth of field of the camera. So this principle was something that I explored in many different of my in many different projects where I tried to figure out a, you could say, a performative diagram that sets up a set of relationships, and in this case, the relationship between a depth of field, the distance of sonic events, and the visual events in the image, and try to feed this algorithm with different inputs and try to explore this principle. So in Stadtmusik we focused specifically on auditory space, and as an invisible structure that has an impact on the way how we perceive sense of place. Another example of that more recently would be the case of urban services that are also a layer of reality that we very often do not perceive in its entire structure. And Trash Track was a project that well, I spent a lot of time working on in the Sensible City Lab at MIT. I started leading this project in 2009, and the idea here was to understand the spatial aspects of waste removal. When we talk about waste management, we are dealing with a public service or with an infrastructure that is very archaic in many aspects. I always find it striking to compare those two images. On the left, we have a modern material recovery facility, or MRF, how is it called? And on the right, we have a equivalent facility that is about 100 years older. And I always find it very interesting how similar those two images are. We have a lot of manual labor involved in recycling. We have a conveyor belt. We have people recovering objects that are valuable. And so because of this very archaic nature of the waste system, one of the central issues is that we don't really have a lot of information about the movement of waste, about how the whole system plays out. We have mostly information about how much material is collected at different facilities, but we don't really have information, at least in the US, we don't have information about the movement, about the transportation of waste. And the only way to really capture this was to follow the trajectory of individual items of waste, because only through this it becomes possible to observe how those different facilities are in correspondence with each other. So we used active location sensors to track each individual item. On the top, there is a sensor that was developed by Louis Giraud in the Sensible City Lab. It's basically like a small cell phone that constantly logs the IDs of cell phone towers that it registers with and sends them back as a text message in regular intervals. So we used this for the first 700 items that we deployed in New York and Seattle. And on the bottom, we have a commercial system, asset tracker that we used to scale up the project. We deployed 2,200 of these. So roughly, you could say we have 3,000 items that we deployed. And we worked with volunteers in Seattle, and asked each volunteer to prepare a number of 20 items according to a list that we gave them, because we wanted to have a good spread of different objects, including electronic waste and household hazardous waste, all kinds of things. And for us, it was very surprising to see how, the emotional impact that it had on these volunteers, that they were really enthusiastic about the project. For us, this was initially only a way to create a wide, to create a geographically nicely distributed sample that we could use to analyze the movement of waste. But for the volunteers, they had a very strong interest in understanding what the city does with their objects, and so there was a strong accountability aspect. They mistrusted the city to some extent, and what I found also interesting is that they brought often very personal objects, like this bowling pin that this volunteer donated for us, and they said, okay, they wanted to get rid of it for a long time, but nevertheless, he wants to see, what's the final destination of this object that he had for such a long time. So attaching the trackers was not always a trivial task, as you can imagine, and waste is not the most friendly environment for sensitive electronics. So we had to make sure that the trackers survive and stay attached to these items, and had to figure out how to protect them. So we ended up using this yellow epoxy foam that encapsulates the sensors, and this foam is normally used for insulating boathouse, and it makes the sensors watertight, and you can drive a truck over this sensor, and it's going to survive. And this was, I would say, one of the most difficult aspects of the project. Initially, we only had 20% success rate because we couldn't really figure out how to protect the sensors. And in the end, we had 80% survival rate of the trackers after we figured out, what's the best way to protect the electronics. And so after 6 months, this is a snapshot of the whole data set. What immediately catches the eye when we start in Seattle, we see that we have a number of traces that cover the whole country. The colors blue and red correspond to household hazardous and electronic waste, whereas most of the objects remain here in the Seattle, Oregon area. We also see dots. The dots in this case are data points from the EPA, from the facility registry. Yellow dots represent landfills that have been active and sometimes still are active, and the blue dots represent recycling centers. So it's just looking at this landscape of waste facilities is already interesting. We see that there's a strong urban-rural divide between landfills and recycling centers. So this information was, of course, important in order to figure out what's actually going on at these locations that the sensors reported back to us. So we had to match the data set that we collected with facility data in order to understand what happens at this specific location. And sometimes it was quite easy. So sometimes we would really get reports like this, where we would see a report that was sent from the FedEx terminal at the airport. And information like this, reports like that, were very important for us in order to estimate the mode of transportation. Interesting cases like this one, where 2 different printer cartridges were ended up in the same facility in northern Mexico, but they took very different routes. One traveled through California, through I-5, whereas the other one first went to Chicago and then all the way back. And this was, by the way, our longest trace, over 6,000 kilometers. And this raises the question to what extent the impact of transportation diminishes the benefit of recycling. And in this case, it was interesting to find out that this was actually the environmentally more efficient way, because this was using a railway. So this was just a natural way how the rail system works, that it would first go to Chicago. Whereas this is a truck that basically just travels down the freeway, and this has a higher impact in terms of transportation. And this was also from a research point of view, one of the most important findings of this project, that there are cases where the impact of transportation actually diminishes or cancels out the benefit of recycling. And this is something that all the material the models, the life cycle assessment models by the EPA, for example, the WARM model, does not really acknowledge. They use a very small standard value for accounting for transportation. And we showed that in many cases, multimodal and long traces have a much higher impact. So this is the facility in Mexico where it ended up. Also, lots of reports were sent from different ports along the Pacific coast. Here we have the main landfill in Columbia Ridge that Seattle services. And so we couldn't really get information from overseas because our trackers use the cell phone infrastructure to report back the locations, and on the ocean that's not really something accessible. But nevertheless, we saw quite a number of objects sending their last reports from different port facilities, either in Vancouver or in other harbors. And this case is also worth mentioning. Looks like a landfill where over 2 weeks we had a number of objects that sent their last report from this location. And they came from a recycling center, so they were already sorted out. But then we discovered that this facility is actually a gravel facility that is not allowed to accept any waste at all. So Angela, our RA, she sent them an email, a very blunt email, and the response was, of course, I have no idea what you are referring to. We never accepted any waste. We are permitted to accept concrete, asphalt, clean fill, topsoil, sod, stumps, and brush. So we see there are many unsolved mysteries in this data set, and we have many more examples like that. It might be that many things could happen. So it might be that the facility manager does not really know what's underneath the asphalt, concrete, clean fill, and so on in the same truck. So it's very difficult to figure out what happened, whether there's a systematic illegal dumping going on or whether this is accidental. And this is something that in our follow-up project that I cannot show yet because it has not been published yet, but we are working on mapping the global, so this was the last project that I worked on at Sensible, mapping the global movement of electronic waste. So just a short video to explain this process. Again, here we see the main landfill, and yeah, we have cell phones. It's funny when I show this this map on recycling conferences. Some people would say, "Ah, yeah, I know these guys in Texas. I work a lot with them." So in the end, you don't have that many companies who are, and it's a very highly specialized field. So while I was working on this project, I got really curious how a similar approach would play out in a purely informal setting. So Seattle, in at least for US standards, is a very highly optimized and well-planned system, but you also have cities where you don't have any form of centralized waste system. So in 2010, we started working with University of Sao Paulo to work with local waste cooperatives. This is the facility of Copamare, which is one of the oldest waste recycling cooperatives in Brazil. And they have this space underneath the freeway where they bring all the material in order to separate it and sell it back to industry. So it's a worker-owned cooperative of around 20, 30 waste pickers, and they have been in the business for a long time, and they are experts in how to collect waste, how to find waste, how to find useful material in the city. And so what I found fascinating is that they read the city in a completely different way, and all their operations are basically organized through tacit knowledge. So they have very little formal planning, and this is at the same time one of the main challenges that they are struggling with right now, because Brazil now has a new national solid waste policy that grants these recycling cooperatives a lot of new opportunities. But in order to take advantage of these opportunities, they have to formalize and to professionalize their operations. At the same time, they know and everyone knows that just applying the business models of formal companies to such a complex social system does not really work. So our idea was to use the sensing technology not as a passive tool for monitoring and to observing, but rather as an active tool for planning and for coordination. So this is the only document that they have that basically shows the way how they collect material in the city. That's the journal of the driver. So they have a truck. They have actually 2 trucks, but only one person has a driver's license. And they have also a number of manual collectors who use these hand carts. And each of these manual collectors has over the years figured out the best way, what material to collect, how to collect it, where to collect it, and how to make money from this material. And since both these, in this cooperative, everyone was working highly independently, so they didn't really coordinate that much. And for us, it was a first attempt to figure out how does the truck collection and the manual collection compare to each other. And here we have, in blue, we have the trucks, and in orange, the manual collection. And you would think that truck collection is always, preferable, but in this dense location of center of Sao Paulo, traffic is a big issue, and you cannot always use the truck in all circumstances. At night, you cannot use the truck, for example, and parking is a big issue. So truck is actually highly constrained and limited mode of collection. But it was interesting to see that the manual collectors only covered this area with the cooperative here in the center. So in this methodology, we would give each collector a GPS logger, which they would take during the day, and afterwards we would show them the map that the trace that they recorded, and discuss the different ways how to understand why they would make certain decisions. And it was interesting that our collector said, so this is one of the collectors who said that, well, when he was young, he used to collect in this area, but here are steep hills, and he doesn't want to carry up his cart every time, so he doesn't collect there anymore. Whereas here it's mainly residential, and there's not a lot of good material. Plus, it's also far away from the cooperative. In this area, there are lots of good shops that have material. He only focuses on cardboard because that has the best ratio of profit versus weight and availability. But he doesn't go here because there are many public buses, and he has to use his cart on the street. So this is too dangerous or too difficult for him. So he basically always goes the same way, which is a 6 kilometers, one loop, and he would go the same route twice a day, so 12 kilometers, which is quite a distance. So after that, we try to figure out together with the cooperative to what extent can we use these tools to plan their collection activities in a more formal way, and we did a number of participatory design workshops together with the waste pickers. And just some of the ideas that we tried out, we implemented this application because they were in a very rich neighborhood, and everyone had smartphones in the neighborhood. So we thought, okay, what if the local residents would have a way to report availability of material that they have that the cooperative can pick up? And tried this out with the cooperative, but it turned out that there are many complex social issues that are connected to the practice of collecting. For example, one thing was one concern of the cooperative immediately was that this would raise expectations that they cannot fulfill because they cannot always respond to each such request. So just using this digital technology would raise unrealistic expectations on the side of the residents. At the same time, the residents were the main resource for them to establish a trusted relationship with the community. So they were really dependent on the face-to-face interaction with the local residents, and so they were also concerned that mediating that would take away from this face-to-face time. And so here we see that the technology is in a way trivial, but the complex issues that are related to the governance of this public service are very complex. And I think this is also what makes waste systems so compelling, to me at least. So right now we have one of the projects is still continuing in Recife, developing an e-waste collection system together with a group of cooperatives. But one of the main questions is how does this relate back to to the situation, for example, in the United States? And there's one common theme that involving the individual, involving the citizen in the operation, in monitoring, in the management of public services is a topic that is also very timely in the US. And traditionally, cities, this represents the way how cities would view the involvement of amateurs in the management of public services. So that there are lots of concerns about the quality of work that non-experts can do. But in the past 5 years, this has changed significantly, and almost all cities now have developed citizen incident report smartphone applications, and that allow citizens to report incidents like potholes or broken streetlights. And all of these systems are more or less similar, although most of them are developed from scratch. And for me, one of the main questions was how does the design of these systems, design in the broadest sense, not just in the sense of the interface, how does the design of these systems correspond to the way how these infrastructure services are organized. And the value that these systems generate is there definitely. This is a map of just 3 different types of complaints from New York: noise, graffiti, and litter. And we immediately see a lot of different patterns that pop out, where we see that in Manhattan we mainly have noise complaints. We have graffiti in very localized areas, very clearly delineated areas, whereas the more suburban neighborhoods have a stronger are blue, so there are more litter complaints. So this data is valuable for the city, and the city, of course, wants to take advantage of the participation of the citizens. But of course, we shouldn't forget that those are actual complaints, and when you move from the map to the actual text that people submit, this is in the case of Boston, then you see that there again are you will find a lot of very critical. This is the most one of the most mild ones. So and you also see that accountability issues that are directly addressed. So this presents a design problem for the city. On the one hand, they want to encourage participation. On the one, they want to engage citizens in using these systems and perceive public service as a public good. On the other hand, they want to prevent the visibility of very critical reports. And this is where I think that design really comes into play. And if you look at the way how these systems are set up, it's very subtle. So on the one hand, on the Boston website, all the issues are directly unmoderated, posted to the city's website. But at the same time, it's like a Twitter feed, so you don't really have a search function, and new reports keep coming in. So it's very hard to find a report from 2 years ago. So this is a very, very clever way to create transparency and opacity at the same time. And this is just one example where design really becomes a very important factor for mediating infrastructure governance. And specifically, visualization plays sometimes a very important role in these dynamics. So this is, for example, what we see here is a very famous dissertation by a former German defense minister, Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg. And since he was as a politician, he had very little time to write his dissertation, so there was some concern that this dissertation was plagiarized. And the official media channels would downplay this issue. But then a collective of anonymous internet users got together to analyze his dissertation and identify all instances of plagiarism. And every section that you see in color here corresponds to one plagiarized uncited source. And together they also included the bibliography, they color-coded it. So because of this convincing evidence, the minister has had to step down. And for me, this was interesting to see, in this case, visualization had a very important role in coordinating the participants of this social accountability initiative. And you can immediately tell that this representation was not created by a graphic designer. The colors are all over the place, and it's very, very messy. But as an artifact for that helped coordinating this group of anonymous users, it was very useful because it helped them to figure out which parts are already covered and which are still open to scrutinize. And so in a symposium that I organized with a colleague who will be here at Northeastern tomorrow at our book presentation of accountability technologies, we decided to look at individual projects and instances of social accountability initiatives that actually made an impact and used visual media for coordinating, for communicating, or for analyzing, a specific situation. And this is actually a pretty multifaceted topic, and a lot of these forms of representation are also brought into public space, into the actual urban space. This is a very familiar form of informal accountability, of the union rats that are supposed to create informal pressure through naming and shaming. Something we can find in public space. Dieter Sinnbauer from Transparency International came up with this term of ambient accountability, where he looked at different forms of representation in public space that are either connected to corruption or other accountability issues. So those are the Know Your Rights murals that you have in some places in the Bronx and in Brooklyn. And the only purpose of these murals is to inform citizens what they have to do when they are held up by the police. What are their rights, and how should they respond? Another example, the Spanish protests of May 2011, where basically the whole youth of Madrid camped out in Puerta del Sol, in the center of Madrid. But these protests were for many days completely ignored by the newspapers. So a friend of mine started to investigate how our newspapers or how our traditional media formats dealing with these protests, and he started creating a visualization tool that really grew out of this interest in how this works by just looking at collecting all the front pages of newspapers and just marking all the areas that are dedicated to a specific issue, and then comparing this with the political inclination of a specific newspaper, and comparing it with social media frequencies. So this is now a visualization tool that is a open source web service that many people use in many different cases that grew out from this specific interest and need. So this covers mostly the range of what I consider infrastructure legibility. So specifically, I'm interested in, so, you know, what would infrastructure legibility entail? So I would say that on the one hand, you really want to see the structure and the activity of the system in both a, you know, spatial and temporal dimension. You want to see also the consequences of these actions, of these processes that happen in a particular service. You also want to see yourself reflected in the system. This is one of the main motivational factors for all the people who submit reports, that they want to see their own report also in this system. But also seeing the others and getting an awareness of the social side of such a service, which is of course always tricky in terms of privacy, but interaction design has a few solutions for that. For example, in terms of social presence and social translucence, which basically gives you an idea of activity through, you know, just showing. Giving you a sense of the activity without really disclosing identities of any users. So to conclude, for me, visualization is a boundary discipline. I don't really see it as a graphic design subdiscipline. And if you look at the history of visualization and information design, many central tools and techniques and ideas did not come from graphic designers. They came from physicians. They came from statisticians, and a wide range of different disciplines. So for me, visualization is a boundary discipline that makes most sense at the boundary between different disciplines as a way to, you know, translate and to coordinate action. And yeah, I think I'm gonna stop right here, and yeah, would be happy to answer any questions. Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and there's definitely a lot of romanticism about bottom up and you know, technology as a replacement for you know, bureaucracy and so on. But I think, and in that sense, it's very closely related, of course, to you know, new public management paradigms, where the idea was really to, you know, to run the city like a company. And I think everyone now agrees that this paradigm has failed. But I would argue that it's, of course, there's some of that in terms of making management more efficient, but on the other hand, it's not about outsourcing, it's not about cost reduction, because creating these systems actually is a big commitment, it is a big effort for every city. And so I think all this e-governance discourse, I would not place it into the new public management realm, because there's now this other paradigm of the neo-Weberian, I don't know, neo-Weberian state or something like that, which really focuses more on the role of the public hand as a steward for the public good. And I think all these 311 systems are definitely, I would place them more in that space. Yeah, I think there's definitely the danger of from the perspective of the, both from the perspective of the city, but also from the perspective of the citizens. From the perspective of the city, I think one of the big issues is that an overemphasis on responsiveness as a central value, which is not possible. And you know, at some point the city has to make the decision whether, you know, they should always, you know, fix a specific pothole or whether just invest in a better street altogether and think in a more long-term perspective. Yeah, I mean, this represents, in a way, what you just articulated represents my journey from beginning of the PhD to the end. In the beginning, I was really interested in all these bottom-up forms of coordination, and in the end, I really, you know, basically saw exactly this tension and this.
Yeah, but you know, it's interesting. Actually, I thought that my favorite slide of all of it was the one of the painting that was repaired by the amateur 2 or 3 years ago. Where was that, in Spain? Or
yeah.
Someplace. And because it alluded to the need for curators, it alluded to the need in this data-rich environment for not only bottom-up, but also the idea of curated information. And it seems to me the great promise here is, I agree, you can't, just because I can text that my sidewalk is broken, or worse, that, I don't know, my whole neighborhood is unsatisfactory to me. You know what I mean? In other words, obviously you can't act on all that stuff. But what you can do is perhaps much more powerfully visualize possibilities for regions or larger areas that are very hard for any individual citizen to get behind now, but could build political support for things that we don't have, we're unable to create political support for now. And for me, that's the other side of this coin that I think is much more promising than the ubiquity of the ability to see every flaw and therefore be depressed that not everything can be fixed. I agree that that is a depressing side of it. But on the other hand, the idea of the ability to visualize possibilities in a very complicated environment, I think is very promising, especially politically.
It's a good point, yeah.
A lot of what you talked about is data, and you know, I'm curious when you mentioned the example of the dissertation and how you said it was kind of a mess, and clearly a graphic designer didn't do this. And I'm curious in your work, how much you think about design? Are there other iterations? I mean, in a room of designers, I'm interested to know also how much that informs. Do you see that as a tool also to actually help one understand the information in different ways, or just how does that enter into the process of mappings and your work as an information?
Like looking at your earlier films where were simultaneous with other things, but where there was a very clear and explicit aesthetic intent, working with often given data, and the kind of manipulation of that data in very subtle ways to create a very aesthetic experience. And then in some of the materials that went to the end of the presentation, it was often still actually very visually compelling and quite beautiful, but less explicitly aesthetic. How do you move along that trajectory of what role design plays? Is it merely a tool of communication, or is there another register I think it's also
So, that's, I mean, again, two very good questions. For the Gutenberg project, for the dissertation project, a number of visualizations were made for this. One was by Gregor Aisch, a very, famous information visualization designer in Germany, who made a very clean and very nice representation, a very abstract representation of this. I did not choose this as an example because it did not contain all the extra, social references that the other example included. And for example, all these, marking and annotations of the different sections and all of that was not really preserved in the very clean aesthetic other example. And so in a way I see both as important, but the way how I would understand design for example, in the Brazil project, is that design in the broadest sense is really the way how how you integrate the technology in the social practices of this organization. And this includes not only visual languages, this includes protocols, this includes the work processes, a very holistic set of decisions. And one could argue that this is basically pushing the definition of design too far, but I think I still think that all those decisions are made either by someone or by a group of people, and they determine the way how how these systems operate. And
but it's a question of rhetoric, though. I mean, at least the architecture department, this is
right.
the way, in the School of Architecture, this is a little bit our mantra, which is, design is the thing that you do to work out a problem, not the aestheticized second
Yes.
step. I mean, it's a little bit of a mirror of what we do, right? People, but it's also a rhetorical position too, which is that design output, visual language, seemingly unpolluted by arbitrary second choices, also has initial authority. So your raw map of where the garbage picker goes is more forceful than a third generation version of that to tell this story or to get other kinds of chart junk around it and needless icons and things. And I don't think that we should pretend that those aren't also design choices.
Of course, yeah. That's why. Yeah.
Maybe in some context it's necessary but I think that there is a whole other thing that you're getting at that we're becoming more self-conscious about even here, in our department anyway.
I think that's why that slide is so interesting with the garbage pickers, because there was that moment where you're sort of lurking in the right half of the picture, but there you are, the visualizer with the trash picker in front of the printout, and so there is this moment where this presentation is actually put into context, and you're like, look, trash picker, that's where you went, let's learn from this, right? And that's why also that slide of you can record police activities. Well, that is a particular context, right? I mean, that is chosen to be painted on the side of the wall because that's where the police and the perpetrator and the viewer could be. So there is this that's context for the message behind the design.
So the map of the garbage pickers was actually a map that we used on the field, without internet, printed out locally on the laptop, and I thought for me this was important to not show a stylized post-processed version, but actually show the artifact that was actually used to have this conversation, and so I think the point about context is definitely spot on, yeah. So I think one way how this is very often discussed is visualization as a way to change the behavior of people. This is actually a perspective that I personally don't believe very much in, because I think that specifically in waste and recycling there's too much emphasis on the behavior of the consumer rather than the way how the system is set up as a whole. And I'm always a little bit suspicious about the idea that information can change behavior. I mean, information can inform, but the behavior, your decisions are in a way, it can maybe support decisions. It can create an awareness of a certain reality. When we're talking about behavior modification as a goal, then we are in the marketing department, not to say it's in a negative way, but as a in that sense, I would say visualization is really more a awareness tool. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in what we talked a little bit before about the use of data in governance and how municipalities either respond or don't respond. I can think, building on what Tim mentioned earlier, I can think of another another instance of a nefarious use, and that would be, for example, the use of CompStat data that's been policing data.
Yeah.
That's been much maligned and criticized in how it's been used.
The mugshots and things like that. The mugshots and all that stuff that is publicly, yeah.
Yeah, and also the use of, I think in New York it's called CompStat, of how police departments, or at least also for those of you who watch The Wire, there was a season on The Wire talking about policing, where the police have been criticized at modifying how they respond to crime to, in a sense, essentially manipulate the data so that it appears in a certain way.
Yeah.
I can't think of another example besides that, or
yeah.
that the municipalities are responding, they're just responding in a way to sort of fix the data and not necessarily the problem.
I don't well, that's certainly possible. I was in a conversation with the Cambridge police here, and they were interested in predictive analysis based on prior data that they collected. And the way how they approached this problem was actually very simple and very commonsensical. You know, if you have one corner where someone was mugged 5 times last week, then they're going to send someone there every day. I mean, it's a very commonsensical thing. I think there's, to that extent, this whole idea of predictive analysis based on big data analysis is still way off. But I would certainly believe that, and there are studies in the public in public services that have shown that the volunteer data is more accurate, not because they are more rigorous in the way how they collect, quite the opposite, but because specific departments have a certain interest in the data being in a certain way. But of course, also the way how volunteers work with data can be and is very often highly problematic. So people would specifically only record cases that support their agency, and so it's a complex domain. Thank you. Thank you.